thing I wanted to pick up with you from the book was the last couple of chapters move into areas of justice
Mm.
and mission. And I think, I found that really helpful because we can put things in little boxes sometimes, can't we? These little compartments. And I think, well, now I'm doing, prayer time. Now I'm doing quiet time. Later I'll do mission, or, later I'll be concerned or involved
Yeah.
in sort of injustice. But there was a lovely through line in the book, a lovely journey that took you into mission and justice. So I was wondering how that plays out for you in your life.
Well, I mean, at the minute, I guess just dialing a little bit back from that, it is that idea of breathing in and breathing out. When something's breathing in and breathing out, it tends to be alive and
Mm,
healthy. If we just spend all our time breathing in, like I've got to have my rule of life, I've got to spend time with Jesus, all of that's great. But Jesus did come down from the mountain. He did come back from when he went to the desert place. He did leave the garden. So the idea of breathing, we breathe God in, but we're
mm,
called to breathe him out in justice, in mission, in evangelism.
mm,
And it's a daily process for me. So right now that kind of works. Well, actually, it's just about to go through a stage of upheaval because I'm on next Friday. I'm moving back to Ibiza for 3 months, and living a missional lifestyle there is a difference to living a missional lifestyle here. But I
mm,
guess I'm looking, John, for that sense of I don't know if I talk about this in the book. I hope is how interruptible am I?
mm,
If I'm spending a lot of time in the Lord's presence,
mm,
surely I must get used to His voice. Surely I must be, And I look at James, no, Peter and John
mm,
going to the temple, and they've walked by that guy so many times.
mm, mm.
The guy who couldn't walk, and that time they turn and go, silver and gold have I none, but such as I have, I give unto you. In the name of
Yeah.
Jesus, get up and walk. And it's like because they'd spent time with Jesus, because they'd been filled with the Holy Spirit, it's almost like they became way more interruptible.
Mm,
They
mm,
allowed almost, it's like when I was young, if I messed around at the table, my dad would go, if we were with guests, he would go,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
it would be like, that little kind of, it's if you don't stop when we get home, there's
yeah,
going to be trouble. And
yeah.
I think in many ways the Holy Spirit's a bit like that. It's a bit like I
Mm,
knew what my dad was doing when he made that cough because I'd spent time with him. I
yeah.
knew the intonation of his voice. I knew what he meant when he did that.
Mm,
And a prayerful life should lead us to be able to pick up the intonation of his voice and the the little interruptions that he
yeah.
wants to do in and through us throughout the day. So yeah, I think it's living an interruptible life
Mm, mm,
is increasingly. I didn't write this, and this came to me after the book, and I so wish I'd got it in there. Maybe there's another book, I don't know. But the idea that we're called to be contemplative activists.
mm, mm.
I think we've always almost had this thing as well. We're like, oh, I'm an activist or I'm a contemplative. Actually, no, we're meant to be both.
Mm,
We want
mm,
to, or in other scenarios, it's like I've contemplative or charismatic.
mm,
We
mm.
can be both. We
Yeah,
can, we can be both, and I think for too often we've been a one or the other, and we've kind of like, oh, that's those guys that have old buildings. They do, they're the guys that make all the noise. Actually, no, we need this, and I think I'm seeing that around the world. I think I'm seeing a greater desire amongst some of the noisier Christian faiths in a good way
mm,
that they're picking up a contemplative practice and a background to it. So, and I think we can be both. Would be my. We've developed this app called Lectio 365, which has gone really really well. But I think it's built some sense of the contemplative into people's lives, but it hasn't said you can't be an activist.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And there are through the seasons of that, there are times where you are often prompted by the app to think about injustice in the world, or roll up your sleeves and do something about it. So there is that, and I think you're right in saying that. Very often in life we're sort of pigeonholed, aren't we? So it's like, oh, you're one of those, or you're one of those, and denominations sometimes don't help with this. All right, so if you're part of that denomination,
Yeah.
you must be. sort of
Yeah,
old or loud or whatever. But I think what that sort of flattens out
yeah.
is the fact that God is working on us individually. Like you were saying, that there's a masterpiece being created.
It was funny, when I was doing my master's, my professor said to me that I would often say, oh, they do liturgy in their church. They're a
Mm,
liturgical church. And he said to me, Brian, everybody has a liturgy.
mm,
Every church has,
mm.
your liturgy could be getting donuts out and coffee and saying there's a creche upstairs. You say the same thing every week. And it's funny how that we have in our minds, oh, they're the liturgical church. Well, actually, no, a lot of the free churches, not the new churches, they're just as liturgical. It's a different liturgy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, it
And
could be a less formal, but it's still
yeah,
there. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. This idea, I'm really attracted to the idea of how interruptible we are in the course of our lives, and linking that to time spent with God is to learn his accent, his intonation, his cough. Um, for those people maybe listening who don't feel confident in their ability to hear God, or confident that they have heard from God or will hear from God, what kind of advice would you give in terms of being interruptible?
Well, there's different levels of interruption.
Mm,
So there's the interruption of offer to pray for someone,
mm, mm,
that's not, you don't really need to think it was that God, because the devil wouldn't want you to do that,
yeah,
pray for
yeah.
someone. So, or I feel I should share a Bible verse with my friend. What's the worst that could happen?
Mm,
Is,
mm,
is in my I know that sounds, so there's that level. There's the kind of like move to China level,
yeah.
which is a whole other ball game. You
Mm,
know, there's the geographical relocation or the employment relocation.
mm,
You think God's saying it's time to move on from this job to a new job. How
mm,
do how do I make sure I get that right? Because
mm,
we're and there's a number of things. Number one is I don't think God has given us a tight rope to walk on as
mm,
terms
mm,
of His will.
mm,
I think the boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places.
mm,
I think it's more like an exploration. I could have been an artist. I could have been, this. I could have been that. There was a broad field that my father allowed me to walk in. So I think sometimes to not make it kind of like so like, oh no, if I fall off, I'm going to be outside of the will of God. That's
mm, mm.
especially if it doesn't really involve uprooting your children, or anything like that. There's bits that I think are super easy. The other piece is is it biblical? So
Mm,
is the Lord, is this consistent with scripture?
mm,
Second one is, have you got advice? Are there people you can talk to?
mm,
Have you got Christian friends who will be honest with you?
mm, mm,
You don't want to be the person who rocks up to X Factor and sings the really bad song, and they all go, "You're rubbish,"
yeah,
and the person goes, "Yeah, but all my family told me I was brilliant."
yeah.
You need some people who can give you courageous conversations and be honest with it. So,
Mm,
for instance, we moved to Ibiza, and I was the senior pastor of a church. My wife had a really great job.
mm,
This was the first time we moved, and we had Bible verses, strange prophetic happenings,
mm,
advice from friends,
mm,
doors opening and doors closing,
mm.
and so it wasn't, any one of those events on their own wouldn't have been enough, but
Yeah.
a culmination of a grouping of different things, kind of thing. I think God is speaking. Now, I know we're called to live by faith and not by sight.
Mm,
So maybe that was quite an extreme call. So the Lord was very gracious to us. But
mm,
I think there are decisions I have to make now where I won't get as much,
mm,
you know,
mm,
confirmation. Sometimes you just have to live by faith. So I think early doors, you get way more signs. The older you get, the more he's saying, right, I want you to live by faith. I think you
mm,
get more sight when you're young in your,
mm, mm,
and
mm.
you have to grow into faith. God, I trust you. I feel this is right. I
Yeah.
trust I'm going to do it. If it's not right, I'm sure it'll all be okay.
Mm,
I mean, in the end, even with like the geography stuff, for instance, you're like, even with that, you have to say, what's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is my pride is damaged. I
mm,
come home and say, I got it wrong.
mm, mm, mm.
And pride's a killer, isn't it? So, I feel I'm waffling around the subject, John. I hope that's kind of helping.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely, definitely. I liked what you were saying about sort of growing in faith. That as you walk in it more and more, you learn to trust more, and also linking back to something we were saying earlier, you learn to recognize how the Lord will talk to you,
Yeah.
and so there'll be familiar things that will that will come up definitely.
I think as well, sometimes when we feel he's not speaking to us,
Mm,
I wonder if he's calling us deeper.
mm,
I wonder if he's not really abandoned us. I wonder if he's saying, you've been doing it this way for a while. I want to broaden your knowledge of me. I want to broaden your understanding of my voice.
mm,
Therefore, I'm beckoning you into deeper practices, into hearing me in new and fresh, exciting ways, because God is, as we said, creative. So
yeah.
I think if you're struggling with a crisis, it could be that the Lord is actually calling you deeper, you
Mm,
know.
mm.
Mm.
And that links with something else that you'd written in the book about different seasons of life, and sort of trying to recognize the season that you're in order that you can rest in it. Because if you always think it's got to be summer, then when there are sort of winter and autumn times, it's going to be a struggle.
Yeah, the church has been a little bit guilty of promoting a summertime Christianity.
Mm, mm,
We actually need to promote a year-round faith that can deal
mm.
with all seasons of life. And
Yeah.
I think it is recognizing the seasons. Trying well, I like what you said. I think once you get a handle on what season am I in, it's
Mm,
easier for you to live in it. But
mm,
if you think I'm meant to be in summer and the Lord has popped you into winter and you don't recognize that,
mm,
you're in for a torrid time,
mm,
struggling to kind of like make sense of it all when
mm,
really it's like this is where I want you to find me right now in this season. And I liked writing. I'll tell you what I liked writing about the season, the chapter on seasons. I had a friend once who talked about anchors.
mm, mm,
There's things that anchor us in certain seasons,
mm,
and that's just what they are. I had the opportunity to move to another country a number of years ago, and my sons were at the. This is after Ibiza. My sons were at a different stage in their life, and the anchor in my life was I can't move
mm, mm,
because and actually the role I'd been offered was perfect. I
mm,
would have loved it if someone came to me now and offered it, I'd say yes. But
mm.
then and I was like, this is works for me. I would be fulfilled, Tracy would be fulfilled. But it was brilliant, 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 brilliant. But my children, I couldn't. My son was just about to go to university. My other son was just finishing A levels.
Yeah.
As a season in our life, I had to accept that these anchors mean right now I'm going to stay here.
Yeah. 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 Uh,
And that can be parents, that can be health, that can be all sorts. And it's learning to live with the anchors.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're right in saying that that's what they are, learning to live with that, because sometimes that can come with a huge sense of guilt or a huge sense of shame or regret, and yet the reality is the same Lord that calls us to serve Him calls us to be children and parents and grandparents, and yeah,
Yeah, he's not expecting us to be anything other than that.
mm,
And for me, that's really, really important to. I, I just think we've probably tapping back to something earlier. We God, the tight rope thing. I think is
mm,
just if we could move away from that. As there are some specific times where God will be really, really clear with you, but there are other times where I think it's slightly broader field that
mm,
He's wanting
mm,
us to operate in, and therefore you've less chance of getting it wrong than you think.
yeah, and there's so much freedom in that, isn't there? It's that's really exciting. Brian, it's been so great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
I know, John. Thank you. It's been lovely. I hope I've made sense, and thank you for reading the book.
Mm.
And it's been great to spend this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thanks for the course. We're going to be dipping into that later in the year. How's that been going?
Yeah, it's gone really well. It's when when you see yourself on screen, you're like, and you kind of think, I wish I'd have said this because you try to boil a book down into like 5 sessions, and you're always going to be beating yourself up. But it's gone. It's really helped people. It's been an encouragement to people, and we hope it continues to bless people around the world.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you.